Situational irony is an event that occurs, directly contradicts the expectations of the audience. So, right off the bat, I just want to mention that you should proofread your work because little words tend to get left out sometimes when people don't, right? It occurs that directly contradicts the expectations of the audience. In the story Thank You Man by Langston Hughes, Roger tries to rob Mrs. Jones but ends up getting something he'll never forget. I like your summary here. That's very nice. You might just want to specify who Roger is. You might want to say a boy named Roger tries to rob, a woman named Mrs. Jones, but ends up getting something he'll never forget instead, or something along those lines, right? Thank You Ma'am is a good example of situational irony because the reader expected that Mrs. Jones would turn Roger into the cops for trying to rob her, but instead Mrs. Jones takes Roger home, feeds him, and then gives him $10 he tried to steal to buy the blue suede shoes that he wanted. Nice. Let's continue. This story is an example of situational irony because the reader thinks Mrs. Jones will turn Roger into the police after he tries to rob her, but instead she takes him home and gives him the $10 he tried to steal for the blue suede shoes he wanted. So that's exactly your thesis, like almost word for word. And you don't want that. You don't want it to be exactly word for word because that's repetitious. So what you might want to do, take a look at my 3-paragraph essay that I wrote. And the first sentence of this paragraph, it says that the story has situational irony, but it also says roughly where the irony occurs. And that might help. Because if you kind of copy that formula, then you can restate the thesis without being too repetitious. Okay? At the end of the story, Roger and Mrs. Jones were sitting on a daybed, and Mrs. Jones said, "Now here, take this $10 and buy yourself some blue suede shoes." I don't think they were on the daybed anymore, actually. I think they were at dinner. So you could just say, like, we're eating together, right? When Mrs. Jones said, "Now here, take this $10 and buy yourself some blue suede shoes." This quote illustrates irony because in the beginning, the reader and the protagonist expect Mrs. Jones to turn Roger into the police, but by the end of the story, she has actually given him what he tried to steal and taught him a lesson. Nice. I'm so glad that you included this because so many people are not they're incomplete. Their understanding of the irony is incomplete because it's not just that she gave him the $10. It's that she gave him the $10 and a life-changing experience. The story is a good example of situational irony because the reader thinks Mrs. Jones will turn Roger into the police for trying to rob her, but instead she takes him home and teaches him a lesson. The irony of this story reinforces the theme because Mrs. Jones teaches Roger that even though you are a bad person, doesn't mean. How about just because you are a bad person doesn't mean you can change, right? Just because a bad person doesn't mean you can change. Nice. Sure, I can go for that. I think your thesis, your restatement here, again, this can be very simple. You don't need to go into the whole details of why, because again, that sort of treads into the realm of repetitious. If we've heard it a bunch of times at this point, you could just say this story is a good example of situational irony, period, and call it a day with that. The last thing I think that you should write is, what can people learn by reading this story? How can they use it in their lives in general, right? Now, I don't want like a specific instance of when someone might think of this story, but if you can think of a way that it might make people overall more generous, it might make them more forgiving of others, right? Mention some way that people could use this in general in their lives, and that would be a great way to close out the essay. Autumn, you've got a lot of really good work here. It's almost there. Please address all the comments that I gave you. Even if I didn't write the comment down, please make sure that you're listening closely and that you rewatch this video once or twice just to make sure you catch everything that I say, even if I didn't write it down. And I look forward to reading the final draft. Thank you.